Every association is different, but the patterns are often the same. Decisions about funding, timing, and risk all come into play. You begin to notice that the small choices your board makes today can lead to very different outcomes in the future. In this section of our Case Studies webinar, we'll walk through 3 more examples: Forgetful Villas, Procrastination Point, and Waterfront Overlook. What we learned from their reserve studies and their reactions is sure to give you some insights to use in planning at your association. Watch and learn, and consider what you might have done in their shoes. Okay, let's move to Forgetful Villas. What can you learn from Forgetful Villas? Well, they're an 89-unit suburban townhome, 13 buildings. They're 52 years old. There are associations out there that are getting that old, and we've done 11 reserve studies for them through the years. And what's interesting is there's been big swings in policy from report to report, and we need to recommend in response to that. And let me show you what we're talking about here. The last report, the prior reserve study, they were a little over 300% funded. So we designed a funding plan to intentionally underfund reserves so they would gradually reduce their reserve fund strength and surplus down to about the 100% range. And the way they were going to do that was through a nice, smooth, and stable funding plan that increased gradually over the years. All right? So we get to this last reserve study. The interval was 5 years, and that itself allowed a lot of things to happen. The deterioration rate, the annual deterioration rate in the prior reserve study was a little over $40,000 per year. And in the current reserve study, it's almost triple. And you wonder, what the heck happened? And that's exactly what I thought. This used to be a client in my portfolio. Wanted to make sure my project managers were taking good care of it. They weren't having a typographical error in something. And so, again, let's dive into this property and see what the heck is going on. So let's step away from Garage Door Villas. Let's go to Forgetful Villas. What we learn here is 2 things. Number 1, remember I showed a funding plan last time that we recommended gradual increases in reserve funding over the years? Well, turns out they forgot to increase their reserve funding each year. So they were funding with a 5-year-old number. And remember, they were 300% funded, and we designed a funding plan that was to intentionally underfund them to allow them to kind of burn off that surplus. Well, they spent a bunch of money on this and that and the other thing, and so they have a little less cash than expected. But most significantly, they made a policy change. They thought their landscape maintenance contract was very expensive. They found an alternative that was a whole lot cheaper. And so they changed landscape maintenance companies. Turns out, though, the new landscape maintenance company doesn't touch trees. And you'll notice here that tree trimming is $100,000 every 5 years. So that's $20,000 a year. So that's a lot of cash just from tree trimming that now they're effectively paying that $20,000 per year from reserves. It may look to them that they're saving $20,000 on that landscape maintenance project. Yippee! But they're now just paying it from reserves. So that was effectively, to the homeowner, it was a wash. Just less money paid from operating, more money paid from reserves. The other thing is they found that the driveways are so old now that they need significant repairs, and they're going to need to start doing it on an every 10-year basis. They got a legal opinion, and driveways are common area. So $90,000 every 10 years, that's $9,000 a year. You can start seeing how this all adds up. And then what has happened over the last 5 years? Significant inflation. We all know that. So their building painting just about doubled. Their cost to resurface the pool just about doubled. And the cost to resurface the tennis court just about doubled. So while they were underfunding, their costs went way up, and they added one significant a line item to the reserve component list, and they had a minor tree trimming, but essentially they added this entire tree trimming line item to the component list. So like it's a whole different situation now. And let me show you what their funding plan looks like. At this point in time, because of how they've added obligations, costs to the reserve fund, they're down to just a little over 100% funded, which means they don't have a real surplus to be burning off. So they were funding $2,750 a year from the past when they were intentionally underfunding with our guidance. And now, look, they've got to be funding their reserves at about $7,450, so about $5,000 more per month. That's a significant increase. So there's a real consequence to making policy changes. There's a real consequence to not following the reserve plan as laid out. They weren't increasing their reserve funding each year as they were supposed to. And so let's get back to the PowerPoint here. This is their situation. And what have we learned? Well, everything changes over time. The costs change, the conditions change, the cash balance change. We also learned the board changed who does their landscape maintenance, and that the capabilities of that landscape maintenance company are less than before. That added costs over to the reserve fund. So there's a whole lot of things that change. We can't get stuck in the past, and that's why National Reserve Study standards recommend a with-site visit update every third year now, because it protects you and your association from getting so far behind. So that's Forgetful Villas. Let's move on to Procrastinate Point. And we named it this way because of their style of running the association. This place, 167-unit metropolitan 5-story condo. They have a lot of assets there. It's a great place. They have 5 stories residential, 2 stories underneath, underground parking, nice location right next to mass transit. They have an exercise room, nice exercise gym. They have a golf practice facility. They have a rec room with a piano and an organ. They do a lot of group activities there. A lot going on. Yet, it is 45 years old. There's a lot of those people that are kind of stuck in their ways. A lot of older residents. We've done 33 reserve stays for them over the years. We're a 38-year-old company, so they've hired us almost every year of our existence to update their reserve study. And they are very cost conscious. When I would go there to do their with-site visit update, I would see faded carpet. I would see the walkway decks outside the koi pond worn through, thinking, you guys have the cash to do this. Why aren't you doing it? And they would say to me, well, we don't want to spend the money. People, you're starting to look run down. Your reserves are there to spend, not to hoard. Okay, so let's pop over and I want to show you something about this property. So let's go back and look at UPlanet dashboard. And we're going to Procrastinate Point. Look at UPlanet. Again, series of reserve sites through the years, and we're counseling and guiding and counseling and guiding. Lots of assets, the courtyard walkway, fencing around that, surveillance system, normal things you would see in a mid-rise, hallway carpet, lobby carpet. But you start to see here, hallway carpet, remaining life of 0, stairwell carpet at 0, trash chute doors at 0, the boilers, they replaced one of their 4 boilers. They've got 3 that are limping along. They're repairing those boilers. Starting to get the idea here. Look at the kitchen refurbished, sauna room, elevator lobby walls, hallway walls, a lot of 0 remaining useful life. These people are just plain slow to execute their repair and replace projects. What's the result? Let me show you this. We have a chart here that allows them to recreate what we call an executive summary, and that chart can show some highlights, and I've chosen the format where it highlights all the 0 remaining useful life components. And look as I scroll down, how many of their components have a 0 remaining useful life. You don't have to read them all. You can just see that it's probably a little over half of their components have a zero remaining life. They are just slow to execute the projects. Now, we're recommending at this point in time, all those delays have just meant that they have a whole lot of projects stacked up this year. They should have been spread over the last 5 or 10 years, but they've stacked them up. And right now, they just don't have the cash to do them all because they've been underfunding their reserves. They've been nudging our recommended number down. And so we need to recommend a $1,000 per unit special assessment just so they have enough cash to execute this backlog of projects. So let's get back to the PowerPoint. This is Procrastinate Villas, or Procrastinate Point. What did we learn? Time catches up to you. You can delay projects, but they don't go away. You can't beat or fool Mother Nature or Father Time. If you think you're under reserving because you're not spending money, remember, you're not saving the money. Those projects still need to get done. All those years of under reserving that they've been doing, thinking that because I'm not spending it, I can save it, they're just now behind and it's going to cost them a special assessment. Let's get to Waterfront Overlook. This is another interesting one, different from the 3 others in this webinar here today, because it's a 75 unit, it's a saltwater waterfront right on a harbor, a 4-story, so no beachfront. They have a dock facility. They have a big waterfront deck. It's a nice outdoor environment there. They have a nice pool in that waterfront deck. They have a lot of ironwork overlooking on all their balconies. And so you're thinking, hopefully, ironwork in a saltair environment. They're going to need to repaint it every other year. But it indeed is 58 years old. They've got a lot of, hallways, ironwork, hot water system, fire alarm system. This is their first ever reserve say. They made a guess, and they had been funding their reserves at about $100,000 to $150,000 per year. Okay, that was a guess, and good for them. Let me show you something real quick, and I'm going to come back to this page. So let's go to the UPlanet. Click over to Waterfront. Go to UPlanet, and I want to show you what their deterioration rate is. Okay, here's all their components. And remember, they had guessed at about $150,000 per year. Well, all their assets are deteriorating at the rate of about a little over $400,000 per year. And it's almost slap your head like, oh no. So indeed, this place is in trouble, and in trouble for a couple of reasons. And the couple of reasons are they are sick and tired of special assessments. They want now to budget for stability. We're going to have to recommend a whole lot more reserve funding to keep up with everything they have there that makes it a nice place to live, but it is expensive. And they are also located in one of the few states where they are required to fund per the reserve say recommendation. So reserve says are now required in their state, and they are now required to fund per the reserve say recommendation. So they reached out to us. We're going to provide budget stability, no more guessing. And if we can get them to follow our recommendations, which they are now bound to do, they can say goodbye to these unsettling special assessments. Let's pop back to UPlanet and see what we can see here. A lot of components, and you're seeing some really big ones. And I'll show you in a different view here, their component details. So building exteriors, the metal roof, they just did this a few years ago, 40-year life with 32 years left. That was a $2 million project. They just modernized their elevators just a few years ago, 25 years, 21 years left. They spent the $350,000 on that. A lot of these big projects they have recently accomplished, and they're tired of being special assessed. And here's their boat dock. It's time to work on that, and it's going to be about $1.7 million. They did their pool deck a few years ago, $500,000. You can see money, it's expensive here. And what they're coming up on here is a 60-year realization that the pilings underneath their building need some significant remediation. Their bid on that is $2.6 million. And in addition, their fire alarm sprinkler system, they're going to need to spend $80,000 to get that back up to working, to keep people alive. And then they'll be fixing it at the midpoint. So there's a lot going on there. We had to recommend a big special assessment just to face all the big structural things. $5 million of projects at this place. They had 1.9 million. Where do we show that? We showed that on a different page. They have like $1.9 million now. That sounds like a lot of money until you realize that we have over $5 million in expenses this year. Now, what we did, let me show you. When we let the numbers just run and we do a normal full funding recommendation, they're going to have to go from about $150,000 a year of reserve funding to $540,000, so about $400,000 more per year. That started to feel like a little too much stress. In addition to this $3.9 million special assessment that was about $50,000 per unit, knowing that they're in a state that is required to follow our instructions, we looked at their expense map and look at, once they get through this year, they've got a few years until they have additional significant expenses. All right? So we call this some breathing years. So we don't necessarily need them to start funding ideally right now. And so what we chose here was this. And watch what I can do here. We've got a full funding plan at about $540,000 per year. But knowing that they're each going to pay a $50,000 special assessment, we wanted to do what we could to help them have success at their association. So we said, how about if we design a funding plan that starts at $250,000? Okay? You think, Robert, that's going to crash and burn. And indeed it does. But what if we step them up? And we call this an exercise plan, where we're going to give them some significant steps for a few years. Let's recalculate that. So you can see down here, starting at $250,000, increasing at 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. And that's a little high. So let's back this down to 4. And let's tweak the, we call this a secondary ramp. Let's go up to maybe 3.5. Not 23.5, 3.5. Let's recalculate. And bingo. This is much more palatable. We'll give them a few years to lick their wounds from the $50,000 per unit special assessment, start building their responsible level of reserve funding, and that way they'll have enough for this project here and all their big projects in the future. And so, case study here, what do we learn? Get back to the PowerPoint. Lessons learned. Owning real estate is expensive. This is a nice property. Their ongoing deterioration rate is a little over $400,000. We are able to tell them that you need to bridge the gap to the future with a big special assessment now, but we can buy a few years of time to get you up to where your reserve funding needs to be, 4 or 5 years. And that way you can recover from your personal special assessments and be in 5 years funding enough to take care of the property for the long term. So as my mom would say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. At Association Reserves, we make the present less stressful and the future more secure. If you'd like to join us in that mission, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below with what you'd like to see in a future webinar. Let's plan for your best future.